All right, let's get started. It's 5:05. We've got 56 people here. It's really exciting. It's actually the first time we've done this format. We've never done anything like this before because we're fairly new at this. But I started thinking, how exciting would it be to have somebody who truly is an expert? It gives me a really great pleasure today to introduce Monsieur Patrick Spanti he's the International Export and Business Director for Champagnes Jacquart and Montaudon. And he was born and raised in Reims, France, and is a lifelong resident of Champagne. He was actually born in the shadow of the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And as I said in my Facebook post today, if you haven't seen the cathedral in Reims, it is a must. It's definitely a bucket list. And when this whole COVID-19 thing is over, it's one of the first things you've got to do. So my number one reason for loving wine is there's always something to learn. And one of the great things about Monsieur Spanti and him coming into my life and the life of Preston-Layne is that he has been able to impart his knowledge. And he has a great deal of knowledge. And I think that one of the things that I was there, it was about a year ago, actually, it was in May last year. And he sat down with me and he said, Van, he goes, let me explain Champagne from the beginning. And, you think that you're like, oh my God, well, there's a reason for it. And that's why I wanted him here today to really help us all understand Champagne. We will talk a little bit about Montaudon and Jacquart. And then, basically some of the three major ways that these wines are done, negociant, grower, and of course, cooperative, and the pros and cons. But the first thing I want to do, and we'll begin here, Patrick, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your where you were born, and give us the whole story.
The whole story is this is going to last more than 1 hour, I'm afraid. So do not hesitate to interrupt me. It's difficult to talk about oneself, but I was born in Reims, in this house which I inherited a few decades ago. Actually, a very good vintage year. I'm about 200 meters behind the famous cathedral, which has put on throne the last 24 kings of France. And of course, I was baptized in my local church, which is the cathedral. I don't know if you know about Obelix and Asterix in the United States, this cartoon, but I suppose I fall into the bucket like Obelix did, and I probably drank some of the magic potion then, and I probably decided that I would make all my life in the champagne industry. I tried to buy some vineyards to start, but it's very difficult to buy vineyards in Champagne if you are not a grower yourself. The vineyard of Champagne is made of 35,000 hectares of vineyards, and this is defined by the French Champagne law. And the average property is just 1 hectare, but it stays between the families. So if you are lucky to have an hectare, then your children will have half each. And if you are a son or a daughter, he or she will try to marry somebody who already has a vineyard itself. So no chance for me to try and seduce a nice champagne girl, because I don't have vineyards myself, unfortunately. So eventually I did some university studies in business administration in a famous university in Paris, and then ended up becoming a champagne export director in a smaller champagne house called De Venoge, and then joined Jacquard about 26 or ago or something. And here I am. Basically, I have toured the entire world now, but always came to the same place and still living in the house where I was born, which is not very usual nowadays. Very loyal person, I suppose. I can speak English, Italian, German, Spanish. I'm sure some of you are probably different origins as well. So if you don't understand my awful English language, don't hesitate. I can do this in a different language as well. this is it, Van. I suppose you know more about it, but
Well, my first question for you to explain to everybody, it's obviously a very, very special place. And you taught me that in order to understand Champagne, it's important to understand a little bit about the history and the culture. And obviously we don't, we don't want you to go through all, 2,000 years of it or anything like that. But, maybe if you can help them, because I know that we talked about where Champagne is made and how, and, the different things that happen with that. Maybe you could give the group a little bit of background in terms of the history and the culture and how it evolved into the business that it is today.
Yeah. So vineyards here were planted by Julius Caesar as he tried to conquest Gallia, and he made Reims as the capital of the region, really. So that is why most of the Roman roads cross into Reims. And when we decided to have a king, Jeanne d'Arc decided that the only place where we could meet everybody was Reims. So, and the local wine was, of course, Champagne. So Champagne was probably born that time because it was the wine of the coronation of the king. Now, the vineyard at the time was producing a very awful wine. Awful, not really, but not a very interesting wine. It was sparkling, and nobody was interested in having a wine which was not stable. Our region is quite difficult to grow vineyards and fruit. We are not in the Napa Valley here. It could be freezing up to beginning of May and freezing again in October. Our soil is made of chalk lime, so quite an interesting type of soil to produce minerality, to produce this elegance, to produce this style of very dry wine. But it's an unusual place to produce fruit, actually. It's very difficult to repeat those conditions elsewhere because the fruit here never really becomes mature and is very acidic once the fruit is ready to be cropped. So, but at the end, after 2 fermentations, some nice blending, you produce a unique style of wine made of this very mineral and dry character, which is unique in the world and very difficult to imitate anywhere else. Luckily, we, together with improving the quality and of course cropping beautiful harvests and grapes, we use the creation and the art and the genius of all our champagne growers to blend. We discovered that our wine was beautiful with bubbles. So all this made today a very fabulous wine.
That's great. Do you think, is there any, in your opinion, is there any one thing that happened in Champagne? And obviously Champagne's a very, very large appellation. We'll talk about that in a moment. But is there any one thing that you could pinpoint or say, the reason that Champagne is the way it is because of, is there any one thing, or is it just a combination of
both? Nobody can say has invented Champagne. I mean, I know Dom Pérignon is famous for that, but this is not the truth. What made Champagne famous is a series of important moments in our history. First of all, as it is, the wine is not good. I mean, a single variety wine from a single vineyard is probably not very interesting. You need to do blends, you need to do assemblage, you need to put together wines from different origins, from different villages, and most often from different years, which is why Champagne is non-vintage, actually multi-vintage. I think the Champagne is unique because it is the consequence of cellar master brains. It's not only a wine of the territory, but it's the wine of made by people, made by cellar masters. one element which was probably very important one day to remember was just after the First War, actually. Growers were very unhappy. They were not selling their wines to négociants. Négociants are the ones who make the wine and then sell it. And there were riots in Champagne because there was nobody for their harvest. And this is the time that we had the war, and big strikes, like you can imagine everywhere in France and in this country in particular. And we decided the appellation. The appellation d'origine contrôlée, this concept was created in Champagne. And we decided that Champagne could only come from grapes of a particular region. Champagne could only be produced according to very strict rules, which is a limited yield per hectare, which is a limited volume of liquid per press. So very strict rules in order to make a quality wine. At the same time, growers gathered together and decided that they could not depend only upon a number of négociant houses, I mean, selling people who were controlling the sale, controlling the names, controlling the commerce of the wine, but they needed to create cooperatives, which is the time of the creation of a number of growers associations. And this is the first grower association was COGEVI, Coopérative Générale des Vignerons, and was created in 1929. And over the next 3 or 4 decades, a number of growers' organizations were created. And this is in a few years ago, as a consequence, the creation of Champagnes Jacquart House, which is an emanation of the willingness to be independent from négociant champagne houses.
Excellent. What I know, you told me one time, you said something, and I can't remember exactly how you said it, but you said in most of France, wine is made in the vineyard, but in Champagne, and can you relay that? You know, you said that to me, and I was like, that is just so profound. And I can't remember exactly how you said it. I mean, I have an idea how you said it, but I don't want to take words out of your mouth or put words in your mouth. So, what, in your opinion, is Champagne unique in France in that, you know, France is, I mean, obviously the vineyards are very important, and we can taste the, especially in the Chardonnays, we can taste, you know, the limestone and so forth. But what was that you said to me that one time?
I said so many things. Champagne is not just a wine that you extract from the vineyard and then you age it or you put it in a cask and then it's ready a few years ago. No, you need to work on it. To make a bottle of Jacquard mosaic, for example, you need a mosaic of different villages. And the vineyards of Champagne is about 100 kilometer east-west, 150 north-south. So a lot of, it's a mosaic of places. And to make it a very good wine, you need the art of blending, taking the different grape varieties first. You take some quantity of Chardonnay, which gives this crisp, this elegance, this minerality, the fat of the Pinot Noir, the structure of the fat of the Pinot Meunier, the structure of the Pinot Noir. So the art of blending is absolutely essential to make good champagne. Also, champagne is a complicated wine to produce. I mean, you do 2 fermentation. You start fermenting in the vat, and then put it bottle, and then a second fermentation in the bottle, then age it. So it's really a wine made by people rather than made by nature. Of course, nature has its importance because our grapes have a certain pattern being from a certain region, but the human art and the genius of cellar masters are absolutely essential for the success of champagne. Champagne is also a wine that has been made by people in that the perception of the wine is not only that it is a wine. I mean, it is the wine of the coronation of the king. So it became famous because of that. So it's also a public relation wine more than just a wine. It's the art and the history that is behind Champagne make it what it is today.
Well, you absolutely perfectly recounted. That was exactly the recollection I was looking for, and I think that's important for everybody to understand, is that it's a little bit different in Champagne, and that it's not just the vineyards and the terroir; it's also the people, and of course we also talked a little bit about some of the marketing and the sales that helps make the product what it is. I want to recall real quickly, and I don't know if Floriane is on today or not, but when I'll never forget. I will never forget when on my first visit over, one of my favorite questions to ask somebody, and I asked Floriane, I said, what do you get paid to do? You know, and she said, I get paid to make the non-vintage Brut. And I thought to myself, I thought for sure she would say she gets paid to make Cuvée Alpha because, you know, that's the expensive wine, et cetera, it's vintage. And she said, you cannot imagine the challenge that is involved in making the wine with 5 vintages so it is consistent every time you release it, and that the consumer knows what to expect. So I thought that was very profound.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. The cellar master, and in this case, we have a woman at Jacquard, is the winemaker, and it's absolutely essential and makes a difference. We all, I mean, 80% of Champagne is non-vintage. It looks as if it is an inferior product, non-something. But actually, this is the most difficult wine to produce because it's a multi-vintage, one should say. To make good Champagne, and this is where Jacquard is particularly good at, you need to have reserve wines. We have at Jacquard 40% reserve wines from 2 or 3 years before, so that we can control nature. If a harvest is very wet, then the wine is diluted. You need to use a year or 2 before that have much more character and much more body, for example. So you need to have reserve wines, and this is only possible, the privilege of Champagne has of a certain size. In Jacquard, you have Jacquard Mosaic, and that's why it's called Mosaic. It's a blend of about 40 different wines from 2 or 3 different years and 3 different grapes. So you see, it's 40 different ingredients that compose the wine. And it's a special recipe. Of course, every house has its own characteristic and personality, but this is absolutely essential to make it good. It's like a symphony, if I can compare to music. You have strings here, you have pianoforte here, you have all the instruments and ingredients that make it a beautiful music at the end. And without all these elements, you cannot reproduce year after year, despite nature difference, a beautiful wine which is consistent. So a vintage, now you mentioned Alpha, beautiful wine, of course, is exceptional, but it's probably the easiest wine to make. This is made by nature. Sometimes nature is perfect. You get a vintage means that it's only 1 year, and that one particular year in a few vineyards were just exceptional, outstanding. So you just put together that harvest. There's nothing much to do because this is the nature made it. Jacquard, Mosaic, and the majority of Champagne is made by people. A vintage is made by nature. Quite a difference.
That's excellent insight. I hope everybody got that, because I think that's really, really important. You know, and it's ironic that you know, you would think that the more challenging wine would be the tête de cuvée, so to speak, the more expensive wine, but in fact that's where terroir and nature come into play the most, and then where the consistency of the Brut Mosaic or the Rosé Mosaic, or in the case of Champagne Montaudon, the Brut Classic, to make those wines is very difficult, very challenging. And I've had the opportunity to see those bottles go up on the table in your lab there, and it's I always marvel, like, how do they do that? So it's pretty interesting. I know there's going to be some other questions, and folks, if you have questions, try to get them over to Leona. I think you can either Facebook Messenger her or write on here. She's probably monitoring the chat. It's very difficult for me to do that, but if you have a question, if there's something that Monsieur Spanti could elaborate on, send it over to us. I want to switch gears right now because we're 30 minutes in, and I know you're going to want to get to bed here at some point. I want to talk a little bit about the business of champagne, because that is your specialty. And how many years have you been involved in the business of champagne?
Well, I've stopped counting, but I think it's 34 something years now.
34 years.
Old. But as you can see, it keeps you in good health normally.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's fair to say there's basically three ways. I don't know if 3 ways is the right way to say it, but there's more than 3, obviously. But the 3 major delineations or classifications are négociant.
Well, I mean, there are basically 3 jobs in Champagne to make champagne. The first job consists in looking after the vineyards. Okay, growers. They control 90% of the territory. Then there is a second job, which is very important in Champagne, is to make the wine, which is to press, to vinify, to make it become bubbles and champagne, and bottle, make it ready. And then you have a third job, which is to sell it. Sell it means having a brand, a name, going into the markets. So those are the 3 main activities, and it's different competences. It's difficult to find the same competence within the same entity, if you like. So over the years, the 3 jobs really specialize themselves. Now, if you are just a grower, you are récoltant manipulant. On the bottle, you see a small sign saying RM. RM means récoltant manipulant. This is a small grower who produces everything himself only from its own vineyard. When this type of champagne will be very authentic, but will come from probably one cru, monocru, or a single village. This is not very often exported. Grower champagne are very changing over years because, of course, they depend upon nature, but very interesting to taste if you live in the region, because every year it's, of course, often different. You then have, at the other extreme, large négociant houses. So they belong to wine and spirit conglomerates and have vineyards themselves, but also have contracts with a number of growers. This is a négociant manipulant. Négociant means that he negotiates, he buys grapes, and then, of course, manipulant means that he produces the wine vinified and then sells. The Moet, the Clicquot, the Mumm, and all the brands you probably know in the United States are all négociant manipulant. Where they are good is that they are good at selling, branding, marketing. Given the volume they produce, they have a certain quality due to the size. And then in between, you have what Jacquard is or what Montaudon is, which are medium-sized halves of champagne. In our case, CM, cooperative manipulant, means that we are owned by growers. It is a big difference. We are not owned by a Scottish or American pension fund. You don't find us in the stock exchange. We are owned by champagne people who want to control their future. So we have our vineyards. We use only the vineyards, the grapes from our own vineyards, and of course control all the process. The beauty of it is that we can, by controlling the entire process, control the quality, full transparency of the origins of the grapes, because we do not subcontract any of the side of our business. So this is, and also the size of our business is much smaller, medium size, not that small. It's small enough to have a real personality, a real quality. We drink it ourselves, don't forget. We are the first people to enjoy our wine because our job for generations has always been to make champagne. And we are big enough to have consistency and quality, because you need to have reserve wines, you need to have equipment in the vinification equipment, you need vats, you need enologists, you need a lot of quality control people, so to make it consistent over years. You need a certain size to have reserve wines. So cooperatives or houses of the size of Jacquard, between 1 and 3 million bottles, are the ideal choice to get a certain quality, I would say. So coopérative manipulante, we are in between. Récoltant manipulant, very authentic but small, and négociant manipulant, which are normally the big names.